December 19th, 1943. The frost came early that morning at Ravensbrück. I could see it crystallizing on the wooden beams above my bunk, forming patterns that looked almost beautiful. If you didn't know what they meant, that the cold would bite harder today, that our thin dresses would do even less to keep us alive, that someone in our block would probably not wake up tomorrow. My name is Sofia Novak. I was 26 years old. I was a school teacher from Warsaw before the war, before the occupation, before my husband Jan disappeared into the night with 3 other members of the resistance, before the Gestapo came for me. But here, in this place, names didn't matter as much as numbers. Mine was tattooed on my left forearm. 73,412. The ink had gone slightly green under my skin, like a bruise that would never heal. The morning bell hadn't rung yet, but I was already awake. I was always awake before the bell. Sleep was dangerous here. It made the awakening worse, made the transition from dream to nightmare too violent. Better to ease into each day, to let consciousness arrive slowly, like water filling a cup. Beside me, Margot stirred. French, a pianist from Lyon. Her fingers were frostbitten now, 2 of them blackened at the tips. She'd cried about it for 3 days when it first happened, then stopped crying altogether. That's how it worked here. You cried until you couldn't anymore, and then you just existed. Is it bread day? She whispered in German. We all spoke German here, even those of us who'd learned it just to survive the guards' orders. Yes, I said. Thursday. Thursday meant the SS allowed the Red Cross parcels through. Not to us directly, never directly, but to the SS kitchen staff, who would sometimes, if we were lucky, distribute the old bread before it molted completely. The guards called it charity, we called it survival. But Thursday meant something else to me now. Something that made my pulse quicken, even in this frozen barracks, where most sensations had dulled to nothing. Thursday meant Helena would be working in the kitchen, and Helena meant letters. The bell shattered the silence like breaking glass. Around me, 300 women jolted awake, climbing down from bunks stacked 3 high, their movements mechanical, their faces blank. We had 5 minutes to use the latrine, to splash freezing water on our faces from the communal trough, to stand in formation outside. I moved with them, another body in the stream, but my mind was elsewhere. It was on the small piece of paper I'd hidden 2 weeks ago, folded so many times it was barely larger than my thumbnail, tucked into a gap in the wooden slat beneath my mattress. The paper where I'd written to January. I didn't know if Jan was alive. I didn't know if he'd ever receive it. I didn't even know if the address I'd written, his cousin's farm outside Krakow, was still standing. But the act of writing it has made me feel human again. The act of imagining it traveling beyond these electrified fences had made me believe, for just a moment, that I still existed beyond the number on my arm. Helena had whispered the instructions to me during our last work shift together in the textile factory. We'd been cutting fabric for SS uniforms, our fingers moving fast to meet the quota, the guard pacing behind us with her club. Bread, Helena had said without moving her lips, her eyes fixed on her work. When you come for your ration, put it in your palm, fold your fingers over it. I'll take the bread, press down. The letter will stick to the bottom of the crust. It goes out with the supply truck to the men's camp at Sachsenhausen. The Belgian network takes it from there. A Belgian network. It sounded impossible. It sounded like a fairy tale. But Helena had done it before. She'd shown me a response she'd received, a 3-line message from her brother that she'd memorized and then eaten, chewing the paper slowly, swallowing every word. You are not forgotten. We are coming. Stay alive. I wanted those words. I wanted them so badly my chest ached. Outside, we formed rows of 5 in the Appelplatz. The roll call square. The frozen ground bit through the wooden soles of my shoes. The wind came across the lake Ravensbrück, sat beside a dark, still lake that looked serene from a distance, as if this were a vacation camp instead of a death factory. The SS guards walked the lines, counting. We stood silent, perfectly still. Anyone who swayed, who coughed too loudly, who drew attention, would be pulled from the line. Pulled from the line meant beaten. Beaten meant the infirmary. The infirmary meant death. I kept my eyes forward, my breathing shallow. I counted the seconds. I thought about the letter. After 40 minutes, the count was complete. We were marched to the work assignments. Most of the women went to the factories making uniforms, assembling gas masks, sorting mountains of human hair that came from Auschwitz. I'd been assigned to the laundry commando for the past week, boiling SS uniforms in massive vats, my hands red and cracked from the lye soap, but today was different. Today was bread day. And bread distribution happened at noon, in the kitchen courtyard. I had 7 hours to wait. The laundry work was brutal. We stood for hours in the steam, our thin dresses soaked through, stirring the massive pots with wooden paddles. The guards liked us wet in winter. It meant we'd freeze faster during the march back to the barracks, meaning fewer of us would survive to need feeding. A Polish woman named Christina worked beside me. She was older, maybe 40, though here everyone looked 70. Her eyes were sunken deep, her cheeks hollow. But she worked steadily, her movements efficient. Survivors moved that way, no wasted energy, no unnecessary motion. "You're thinking too much," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the boiling water. I glanced at her. "What? You have that look, like you're planning something." She kept her eyes on the pot. "Planning gets you killed here." "I'm not planning anything." "Good." She pulled a soaked uniform from the water with her paddle, the steam rising around her face. "Because whatever you're thinking about, it's not worth dying for." But she was wrong. Some things were worth dying for. The act of resistance, however small, was worth dying for. The proof that we were still human, still capable of defiance, still able to say no to the machinery trying to erase us, that was worth everything. I thought about the letter again, hidden beneath my bunk. 14 lines. Written in pencil, I'd traded half a bread ration for, on paper I'd torn from a discarded supply, manifest in the textile factory. "My dearest Jan, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you're alive. But I need to believe you are. Because without that belief, there's nothing left of me worth saving. They brought me here 7 months ago. I won't describe it, you'd only carry the images, and I don't want to burden you with what I've seen. Just know that I think of you every morning when the bell rings. I think of the way you'd make tea in our kitchen, humming that song you could never remember the words to. I think of your hands, strong and careful, the way they'd hold mine when we walked by the river. I am still here, still fighting, still Sophia. If you're alive, find me. If you can't find me, live enough for both of us. I love you. I will always love you. S. 14 lines that could get me shot. 14 lines that meant everything. The morning dragged on. My arms burned from stirring. My feet went numb from standing. The guard, a tall woman with ice-blue eyes, who we called the Birch, because she was pale and thin and vicious, paced behind us, occasionally striking someone across the shoulders with her club for moving too slowly. At 11:30 she blew her whistle. Lunch. Break. Line up. We dropped our paddles, formed a ragged line. The march to the kitchen courtyard took 10 minutes, our wooden shoes clacking against the frozen ground. Other work details converged from across the camp, women from the factories, the construction crews, the medical experimentation block. We were all gaunt, all gray, all moving like shadows. The kitchen courtyard was surrounded by a high fence. Inside, massive cauldrons of soup sat on wooden tables, thin, watery broth with maybe a potato chunk if you were lucky. And beside the soup, stacks of dark bread already cut into portions. My heart began to race. Helena was there. I could see her through the crowd, wearing the striped kitchen uniform, her dark hair tucked under a kerchief. She looked thin, like all of us, but there was something bright in her eyes, something that hadn't been extinguished yet. Our eyes met for half a second. She gave the smallest nod. The line moved forward slowly. Each woman received a bowl of soup, a piece of bread. The portions were distributed quickly, mechanically. No words exchanged, no acknowledgement of our humanity. I reached into my dress pocket, felt the folded letter against my palm. My fingers closed around it. 3 people ahead of me now. 2, 1. I stepped forward. The server, a Slovak woman I didn't know, handed me a bowl of soup. I took it with my left hand. Then I reached for the bread with my right. The letter pressed against my palm, folded so small it was almost invisible. Helena was the one holding the bread basket. Our hands touched. Hers closed over mine, pressing the bread into my palm. For just a second, her fingers pressed harder than necessary, and I felt the paper slip from my hand and felt it stick to the crust of the bread. Then she released, and I was moving forward, the bread in my hand, the letter gone. I didn't look back. I didn't smile. I walked to the side of the courtyard, sat on the cold ground with the other women, and began to eat. The bread was stale, hard as wood, but it tasted like freedom. The afternoon work shift felt different, lighter somehow, despite the cold, despite the lie burning my hands, despite the Birch pacing behind us with her club. I'd done it. The letter was gone, moving through whatever invisible network Helena had spoken of, traveling beyond the wire, beyond the lake, beyond the reach of the SS. Maybe it will reach January. Maybe it wouldn't. But for the first time in 7 months, I'd done something that mattered. Christina noticed. She glanced at me while we stirred the vats, her expression wary. "You look different," she muttered. "Dangerous." "I'm fine." "You're glowing." "Stop it." She was right. I forced my face into the blank mask we all wore, letting the deadness return to my eyes. Emotion was dangerous here. Hope was dangerous. The guards could smell it, and they crushed it wherever they found it. But then, at 3 o'clock, everything changed. Birch blew her whistle, not the usual single blast, but 3 short bursts. The signal for inspection. We stopped working immediately, dropped our paddles, and formed a line against the wall. My stomach clenched. Inspections meant searches. Searches meant beatings, selections, arbitrary punishments. Birch walked down the line slowly, her pale eyes scanning each face. Behind her came an SS officer I'd never seen before, a man, tall and lean, with wire-rimmed glasses and a folder under his arm. He stopped in front of the line, looking us over like we were livestock. Then he spoke in crisp German. "A letter was intercepted this morning," he said, his voice cold and precise. "Smuggled out of the camp in a bread ration. We know it came from this barracks block. We know it was passed during the noon distribution." My blood turned to ice. No, it wasn't possible. Helena had done this before. She'd said it was safe. She'd said, "The woman who wrote it," the officer continued, "will identify herself now. If she does, only, she will be punished. If she does not, everyone in this commando will be sent to the punishment block tonight." The punishment block. Block 11, where women were stripped, hosed down with freezing water, left to die of hypothermia in the night. Where the morning count always came up short. I felt Christina's eyes on me, felt the weight of 3 dozen other women, all of them calculating, all of them knowing what the punishment block meant. I thought about January, about the letter that might have reached him, might have told him I was still alive. About the resistance, the network, the small acts of defiance that meant we hadn't been completely broken. I thought about stepping forward, opening my mouth, saying, "It was me." But then something happened that I didn't expect. Another woman stepped forward, 3 people down from me. A young girl, maybe 19, with short cropped hair and a burn scar across her neck. I didn't know her name. "It was me," she said, her voice steady. The officer looked at her. "Your name?" "Anna. Anna Schmidt." "You're lying," he said flatly. "No, sir, it was me. I wrote to my brother. I slipped it to the kitchen worker. It was me." The officer studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to the Birch. "Take her." Birch grabbed Anna by the arm, yanked her out of the line. Anna didn't resist. She kept her eyes forward, her face blank, as she was dragged toward the door. As she passed me, our eyes met for half a second. And I understood. She knew I'd written it. She'd seen me at the bread line, seen something in my face, my movements, and she'd made a choice to save me, to save the commando, to step into the punishment herself. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, "No, wait, it was me!" I wanted to throw myself forward and take her place, but I didn't, because if I did, her sacrifice would mean nothing. If I did, we'd both die. And the network, whatever fragile connection Helena had built, would be exposed, destroyed. So I stood there, silent, frozen, watching as Anna was dragged from the room. The officer closed his folder. "Back to work," he said. "All of you." We picked up our paddles. The water was still boiling. The uniforms still needed washing. And I stirred, my hands moving automatically, my mind screaming. That night, I couldn't sleep. The barracks were quiet except for the sound of breathing, coughing, someone crying softly in the darkness. I lay in my bunk, staring at the frost patterns on the beams above, thinking about Anna. I didn't know her story, didn't know where she came from, who she'd been before Ravensbrück. I didn't know if she had a brother she was protecting, or if that was just a lie she'd told to make her confession believable. All I knew was that she'd saved me, and I didn't know why. Margot shifted beside me. "You're awake," she whispered. "Yes. You can't sleep because of the girl." I didn't answer. "It wasn't your fault," Margot said quietly. "What she did, she made her choice. She made it for me. Yes. And now you have to live with it." I rolled onto my side, facing the wall. The wood was rough, splintered. Someone had scratched words into it, Polish. I think, "God sees us." Or maybe it said, "God has forgotten us." I couldn't tell in the darkness. "Why would she do it?" I whispered. "She doesn't even know me." "Maybe that's why," Margot said. "Maybe it's easier to sacrifice yourself for a stranger than for someone you love. Maybe she just needed it to mean something." I thought about that, about the need for meaning in a place designed to strip meaning away, about the small rebellions that kept us human, the smuggled letters, the shared bread crusts, the whispered prayers in languages the guards didn't understand. Maybe Anna had needed to prove to herself that she still had agency, still had the power to choose something, even if that choice was death. Or maybe she just saw something in me, some flicker of purpose, some reason to believe my survival mattered more than hers. I'd never know. The next morning during roll call, Anna wasn't there. The guards didn't mention her. They never mentioned the ones who disappeared into the punishment block. It was as if they'd never existed. But I remembered her. The burned scar on her neck, the steadiness in her voice when she said, "It was me," the way her eyes had met mine as they dragged her away. I promised myself I'd remember. 3 weeks later, Helena found me in the textile factory. We weren't supposed to talk during work shifts. The guards watched constantly, and any conversation meant a beating. But Helena managed to position herself at the cutting table beside mine, and when the guard's back was turned, she leaned close. "It worked," she breathed. My hands froze on the fabric. "What?" "Your letter. It made it through. The network confirmed it reached Krakow." My heart stopped, started again. Beat so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. "Did he?" I couldn't finish the sentence. I don't know if he got it personally. But it reached the address. Someone there has it. Tears blurred my vision. I bent over the cutting table, pretending to focus on my work, using the motion to hide my face. Jan might know I was alive, might know I was still fighting, might know I still loved him. "There's more," Helena whispered. She slid something across the table, a tiny scrap of paper, no bigger than a postage stamp, folded many times. I palmed it, slipped it into my dress pocket in one smooth motion. "It came back through the network," Helena said. "For you." Then the guard turned, and Helena moved away, returning to her own station as if nothing had happened. I worked for 3 more hours before I could risk reading it. When the shift ended, during the brief moment of chaos, as we lined up for the march back to the barracks, I slipped into the latrine, closed myself in one of the stalls, and unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The handwriting was Jan's. I'd know it anywhere, those careful, precise letters, the way his A's curled slightly at the top. Sophia, you're alive. Thank God, you're alive. I'm in hiding, can't say where, but I'm safe. I'm working. Hold on, we're coming. J. 7 lines, 23 words, but they contained everything. I read them 5 times, 10 times, memorized every word, every curve of ink. Then, like Helena had taught me, I tore the paper into tiny pieces and ate them one by one, chewing slowly, swallowing the words, making them part of me. When I emerged from the latrine, Christina was waiting. She looked at my face and nodded slowly. "Good news?" she asked. "Yes." "Then make it count. Whatever it is, make it worth what that girl gave you. Anna." She meant Anna. I nodded. "I will." Liberation came on April 30th, 1945. The Soviet army arrived in the morning, their tanks rolling through the camp gates, soldiers staring in horror at what they found. By then, Ravensbrück was half empty. The SS had marched most of us out in the weeks before. Death marches into the countryside, trying to hide the evidence of what they'd done. But some of us were still there. The sick, the dying, those too weak to march. I was among them. Typhus had taken me 2 weeks earlier, and I'd been in the infirmary, if you could call it that, burning with fever, drifting in and out of consciousness. When the Soviet medic found me, I weighed less than 80 pounds. He lifted me like I was made of paper and carried me to a field hospital. It took 3 months before I could walk again. Another 2 before I could speak without my voice breaking. And in July, when they finally released me to return to Poland, Jan was waiting. He'd survived. Gone underground with the resistance, fought with the Polish Home Army, and lived to see the end of the war. And he'd kept my letter, the one I'd smuggled out in the bread, the one that had cost Anna her life. He showed it to me on the train back to Warsaw. It was creased, dirty, the pencil faded, but every word was still readable. "This kept me going," he said, his voice rough. "Knowing you were still fighting. Still you." I held the letter in my hands, the paper that had traveled through an impossible network, past guards and wire and death, carried by people whose names I'd never known, risking everything to prove that we were still human, still capable of love. And I thought about Anna, about the choice she'd made, about the sacrifice that had given me this moment, sitting on a train beside my husband, heading toward a future that shouldn't have existed. I never learned Anna's full story, never found out if Schmidt was even her real name. The camp records listed her only as a number, and the SS had burned most of the files before they fled. But I've told her story. I've told it to my children, to my grandchildren, to anyone who would listen. I've told them about the letters hidden in bread, about the network of resistance that existed even in hell, about the woman who stepped forward so I could live, because that's what we owe the dead. Not silence, not forgetting, but the truth of what they gave and the promise that we'll never stop telling it